Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, good morning. Sorry, wrong time. Dr. Lakshmi Vijayakumar is the head of the Department of Psychiatry, Voluntary Health Services, and a member of the WHO's network of suicide research and prevention and the International Academy of Suicide Research, and the former vice president of the International Association of Suicide Prevention and founder of SNEHA, a pioneering suicide prevention organization in India. But on a personal note, I've been looking forward to meeting Lakshmi, as she likes to be called, and it just is it's a great honor to meet such a giant in the world of suicide research and in suicide prevention. And it is my incredible pleasure to introduce Dr. Lakshmi Vijayakumar.
Thank you very much for the introduction, George. It has been a pleasure to meet you. And in the last 3 days, George has become a good friend. So it's always a pleasure to be introduced by a friend. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Okay, I'm going to talk today about community interventions for suicide prevention and also a little bit about the decriminalization efforts in many of the countries. So let's move on. Can I operate the slides or you're going to do it, George? Huh? Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, how do we define a community? See, we have different explanations for communities, but if you really look at it, it is an ecological group, okay, comprising of all the interacting populations of various living organisms. It's not only humans, it's a lot of other living organisms in a particular area. And that's called a community. But really, in today's world, this definition of community doesn't hold because we don't live in a particular area. We have a lot of virtual communities. So probably it's time we have a different definition of a community because the definition of living in a particular area is a little redundant now. So why should we talk about community interventions in suicide prevention? Okay, the fact is, if you look at the suicide map of the world, there are so many different rates across the world. Not only different rates across the countries, but even within the regions of a particular country. Okay, and different methods of suicide. Okay, and you have varying human and economic resources, and you have the culture and context. So how can we develop an intervention which is a one size fit all? I mean, we can have some general principles, but unless we focus on community interventions, we will not be able to make a difference simply because of the variety of culture context, the variety of suicidal behavior, and the variety of suicidal rates and methods in various countries. For example, if we take India, you can see that the suicide rate in the southern regions is 3 times or even 4 times higher than the ones in the northern region within the same country. So the intervention strategies which I plan for the southern regions may be completely irrelevant for the northern region. So, and the other issue is the human resources. This is the latest statistics from the World Health Organization. And you can see that majority of the low and middle income countries where 76% of the world's suicides occur, the human resources are very, very minimal. So unless we involve the community, develop task shifting, develop lay force, training of lay people, and which means involving with the community, we are not going to make a difference. So even though the resources in low and middle income countries in terms of professionals, mental health professionals is very low. If you look at this, the NGOs working in mental health are there in every place, and actually they are more in the low and middle income countries. So, and who are the NGOs? They are all voices of the community. So unless we work with the NGOs, we won't make a difference. And I will just pass this through. Okay. So what do we mean by community interventions? Okay. It is targeted at the community. Okay. You use the community resources. Okay. And make strategies based on the community, and the priorities and perspectives of the community is more important than your priorities. Okay. Is it okay, Josh? Okay. Okay. So it is community targeted, it is community based, and it is driven by the community. So we can't come up with a research proposal and say, I want to do this in this community, unless the community feels it is important, unless the community buys into that intervention, and the community feels that it will benefit the community. So what are the advantages of a community intervention? Because then you're reaching the public, you're reaching the community, and what we need in suicide prevention is a ground cell of public opinion, which will happen when you reach the community. And then it promotes participation. And then when the community buys into your research or interventions or strategies, then it becomes sustainable. It's not project driven. However, what are the disadvantages? It takes time. It takes time to work with the people. It takes time to work with the community, and you will have to use all your diplomatic skills because you'll be dealing with the different sections of the society. And then you feel you have established a rapport, then suddenly the structure changes and somebody else new comes in, and the social and political changes also affect this kind of intervention. However, let me give you a few examples of community interventions. Let's take from the developed countries first. Canada. Okay. They have drawn up a lot of suicide prevention, national strategies, and things like that. But there was not much of a difference. They didn't make a headway either in the community or in the reduction of suicide rate until they started what is known as the 308 conversations, which means they have 308 legislators or parliamentary members or something. So each member, the Canadian Mental Health Mission, each parliamentary or constituent leader was given a packet about suicide in their community, what they can do, whom they have to approach, and they made all of them talk about their community, their territory, their catchment area, and that brought a huge difference in terms of public perception and buy-in into community suicide prevention. Okay, so that is one thing. And then what about Japan? Japan had one of the highest suicide rates, and the number of suicide every year increased so much that it touched 30,000 by 2011. So the Japanese government said that we have to do something. So, and what did they do? So they developed a strategy. They said a policy cabinet level suicide prevention strategy. Okay, did it work? No. Then they said we will have it as a suicide prevention bill. They introduced a bill, a policy change. So did that reduce? No. Then they finally decided that unless we reach the local communities, it's not going to happen. So what they did, each prefecture was given 100 million yen and to do only work on suicide prevention. Okay. So if you look at this, the local government, and when the money was given to the local government to do that, the suicide rates started coming down. The local government started doing it. So what is the conclusion? Cannot, mainly focused on the increases of access to mental health. It is not that, because that was the first step they did. It didn't work. Okay. Japan's strategy was unique, which emphasizes social factors. They gave money to the people and said, okay, if somebody is in a debt trap, you can give the money so that they are out of the debt. You know, if somebody is in an unemployment, so when the social and the community supports were improved, the suicide rate started coming down. So what about this in Hong Kong? See, you see that light blue line? That is the number of suicides by charcoal burning. See, before 2000, you can see that the charcoal burning was practically nil. And then there was a incidence of charcoal burning, which was 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. 0.01%. hugely exaggeratedly reported in the media, which followed a lot of charcoal burning. And you can see in just 5 years, it has become the #2 method of suicide next to jump, and is continuing to remain the same. So this has caused a lot of concern in Hong Kong, and it also spread to Taiwan. So the charcoal burning cases in Hong Kong and Taiwan increased tremendously. So how can we reduce this? What can we do about it? And then my friend Paul Eve came up with a solution where instead of the charcoal briquettes being kept outside where anybody can pick up, the simple intervention he did was that in the supermarkets in a particular region of Hong Kong, in a supermarket, he said the charcoal bags will be kept under lock and key. You can still buy it, but you have to go and ask the storekeeper to give a key and take out the bag. It is a very simple, non-mental health intervention, but this has, as you see, has reduced charcoal burning incidents in Hong Kong. Just that barrier to access to the method has reduced this. And this is a community intervention. You are making the community aware that when you are buying a bag of charcoal, that you have to be careful. And look at this community intervention. This is the only interventions for suicide prevention in women. Okay, I talked about it when I talked about it in women. This is the only intervention to prevent suicide in women. And we know that self-immolation of women, particularly in Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, in India, are very common. And this is the only method of suicide where women outnumber men in any country. So how can this be reduced? It seems impossible. But what they have done is that they have, this is Ahmadi's work, where he has taken a group of people, and in that particular district, he taught a lot of awareness program for young women, drawing competition, painting competition, and then more importantly, see, the self-immolation leaves scars all over. You carry the scars for the rest of your life. So he made people with lived experience talk to the young women about what they went through and what the effect of the suicide attempt was later. And this intervention, community-based intervention, you can see that the suicide rates have reduced in the district when compared to the neighboring district. Okay, then I talk a little bit about the community interventions which we did in Chennai. And one of this is every year we lose about 2,500, 2,600 children because they have failed in their exams. So actually SNEHA started doing 24 hours outline crisis lines because many students and teachers were very disturbed and were calling us. And then we did a small research and found that the young students who died by suicide were those who have failed by a few marks or in one or two subjects. Okay. So with that, with the help of the media, we campaigned in the government, and we introduced in the year 2004 what is known as supplemental exams after your class 10 or 12, which is the board level or school leaving level. If a student has failed in the exam, then they can rewrite the exam within in 1 month, so that they don't lose an academic year and they can go ahead with their academic career. And this simple, and the Tamil Nadu government was the first government to introduce this supplemental exam, thanks to our efforts. And you can see that in the last 10 years, the number of students in Tamil Nadu who have died because of exam failure dropped down from 450 to 230, in spite of a 35% increase in the number of students. And actually this was appreciated, and we were written about even in the Economist, that this was a very powerful initiative, which is useful. Then the Asian tsunami affected Chennai also, and we lost more than 3,000 people in Chennai. And we were doing, I won't go into all the other activities which we did, but we found that in the area in which we were working, people who have been bereaved by tsunami did not come to, we actually pitched a tent and we were in the show talking to people, and people who have been bereaved in the tsunami didn't come and talk to us. So we said, okay, we will go and talk to them. So it was all done voluntarily, no funding, nothing. It was a voluntary effort from our center. So we compared, what we did was, initially we found there were 50 families who have lost someone in one area of Chennai, and we compared it with another 50 families in the northern part of Chennai, where also they have lost about 50 people. And in this intervention place, the only intervention which was done was one of our volunteers going to the bereaved family once in a month, sitting with them for 2 hours and listening to whatever they are going through. There was nothing else. There was no other professional intervention. The only intervention was a lay volunteer who has been working in a suicide prevention center to go to the bereaved family once in a month, sit with them and talk to them, and be of emotional support. At the end of 1 year, we assessed both the bereaved families, both in the intervention and in the control village, and you can see for yourself, depression, suicide, everything was less in the intervention village. So this is a simple, cost-effective community intervention which you can think of. Similarly, we were concerned about the number of pesticide suicides in our country, and these were the states which had 60% of farmer suicide and pesticide suicide. So we, along with a group of, along with an NGO called the Center for Sustainable Development, we identified the widows who have been widowed by the farmers' suicide, and encourage them to do what is known as non-pesticide form of pesticide, okay, which is using pheromones, chili garlic paste, cow dung paste, and all that. So no pesticide was used. And then we can see that villages where no pesticides were used, the suicide rate was much less compared to the neighboring villages which were still using chemical pesticides. But at the same time, so this brought to my attention that we have to do something about pesticide suicides. But at the same time, in India, we cannot make every agriculture non-pesticide, because we need to have food sustenance is a very important aspect for a country of 1.3 billion, and we cannot be importing food. So then we thought of another strategy called the central storage of pesticides. This was done in a central storage of pesticides. This was done in my state in 2 villages where, like a bank locker, we built up lockers. Okay, this is a community intervention. Okay, we engaged with the community, we engaged with the villages, and we found out what is it that they would like, and they suggested that this may be an idea. Okay, so we set up we asked whether we want locked boxes, we want a central storage, what do you want? And they want fixed central storage. So in those villages, we built something like a locker. So every farming household was given a locker where they can store their pesticides. Okay, and this was a very simple intervention. And again, you can see that when compared to the control villages, these villages where we have put up the central storage pesticide has become pesticide suicide-free villages in the last year. So much so that they are being written about in the newspapers, and they have taken a pride in that. And we have withdrawn our the support for the maintenance of this, and the village is continuing that, which has become sustainable now. And so many more villages are asking for it now. The other community intervention is, this was a bridge where a very famous musician jumped to death, and in the next 3 years there were 10 people who jumped from that bridge. So along with the corporation, we spoke to them, and we built up a barrier increased the barrier in the bridge, and the suicide rate from 2014 to now has been only 1, and compared to 10 in 4 years. Okay, this is another initiative which we did. We were approached to do something about the high suicide rates in the Sri Lankan refugee camps. There are about 100,000 Sri Lankan refugees living in Tamil Nadu who came over from Sri Lanka due to the ethnic flare-ups there, and they are living in refugee camps. So they approached and said that this was an extremely high rate of suicide, and they wanted to do something about it. And so we identified, we were wondering how to do about it. But first difficulty is getting into the refugee camp, and there were many political and procedural difficulties because of that. And anyway, so we identified two camps which had more than a population of 1,000 people. And then what we did was, this is the KOTTAPATTU camp where we did the intervention. And what we did was, the control camp was Topukalai. So we assessed everybody over the age of 18 with SSD for depression, PTSD, Beck's suicidal ideation scale, and a sociodemographic form. And we identified as high risk people who were scored over 18, 16 PTSD, over 13 PTSD, had made previous suicidal attempt or had current suicidal attempt. So we identified two groups, both in the control camp and in the intervention camp, people at high risk. And again, so what was the intervention? See, we must remember that we are a resource scarce country, both in terms of human and economic resources. So we have to look at cost-effective intervention. So what we did was, we identified 10 people from the community itself, call them as community volunteers, gave them a very minimal, what shall I say, compensation, which is about maybe $5 a month or something like that. And yeah, $8 a month or something equivalent of that. And we trained them. We trained them for 3 days on how to offer emotional support and how to do a safety planning part. Okay. And the intervention was that these community volunteers will visit the high-risk people once in 15 days, check whether everything is okay. And if there was a problem which they think they cannot solve, then we identify a local mental health psychiatrist who will come to the camp once in a month and treat people who have depression or give medication. And this was completely unfunded, and we used our own resources for this. And the psychiatrist was also very open to coming and doing some free service and provide medication. Okay, so we call this as CAT, which is contact and safety planning. Just provision of contact once in 15 days and provision of safety planning, development of a safety planning plan. And then at the end of 1 year, you can see obviously that the intervention camp, which had higher number of people with higher risk, the suicide and the suicide attempts are much less than compared to the intervention. This is a culturally appropriate, cost-effective, easily doable intervention. And now the UNHCR has taken it up because there are a lot of other refugee camps in Africa and Middle East, and the refugees are increasing phenomenally, and so they are planning to use this model to reduce suicide in the refugee camps. So we also kind of developed a community engagement toolkit for the WHO and devised various forms of how this community engagement can be done. Just to give you an example, for example, if you want to map the village and map the resources, you ask the ladies to come and draw on the road, mark the roads, mark the, where the school is, where the doctor is, where the dispensary is, things like that, playground is, and all that. And then once this is mapped, we transfer it to a paper and then ask them to map where suicide and attempted suicide have happened, so that it is not very obvious, so that we know where the clusters are happening, so that we can approach them. So these are all the kind of techniques which we use in community engagement toolkit, which now has been published by the WHO. So currently we are doing what is known as a SPIRIT, which is the Cluster Randomized Controlled Trial, and we have about we are doing it in almost about 370,000 people. Yeah, and the number of villages are 54 and 62. And so for setting that up, we developed what is known as a community surveillance system, because to gather all the data on suicide and attempted suicide. Okay, and you can see that the community system has identified 55 suicides when compared to 13 identified by the police records. Okay, so that is a gross amount of underreporting which we have done. So what does this do? We are doing it in the Mehsana district, and what we do is again the same principles we are carrying it out. We are setting up a central storage of pesticides, and then we are training 500 community health workers on identifying, supporting, and referring people who are suicidal. And then we are training 5,000 school children on health-seeking behavior, awareness about mental health, and so on. Okay. So, community-based intervention is not, it has to move seamlessly with health services intervention. Neither health services intervention nor community interventions can be worked in silos. There has to be a smooth transition from community, and the community can be involved in awareness, identification, and reference. And the health system can be involved in treatment and protocol, and then follow-up can come back to the community, so that there should be a seamless interaction. And if that happens, it will change community care to caring community. So that I like this quote always, because I think it is true. Never doubt that a small group of concerned citizens can change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that has. So thank you very much. With that, I come to the conclusion about the community interventions, and I will talk about the decriminalization. See, as of now, currently there are 19 countries where attempted suicide is still a criminal offense. And there are 20 countries which follow the Sharia law where suicide attempt is still a crime. Okay. Now, of the 19 countries, 15 of these countries belong to the Commonwealth group of countries. So we are essentially following the British system, and UK has repealed the law as early as 1961, but many of the colonies have still retained it. Even in Guyana, I think the act which still makes attempted suicide a punishable offense is more than 150 years old. It is 1863 or something. It is more than 150 years old, and has really no relevance to what is happening in the ground now. And so there has been an increased call for effort to make decriminalization a priority in the countries where it is. And in 2014, we brought out, I was one of the editors of the first World Suicide Report from the WHO, which strongly recommended that the decriminalization should happen. And recently, just in September, the Reuters Foundation, along with the Global Mental Health Foundation and the WHO, has brought out an international report on decriminalization, explaining why it should be done. And one of the there are some countries, for example, 4 countries recently have decriminalized, which is Cayman Islands, Cyprus, Lebanon, which is the thought was that Muslim countries it's very difficult to decriminalize, but Lebanon they were able to decriminalize suicide. And India, I wouldn't say that we have completely decriminalized, but we could say that we have made the law redundant by passing the mental health bill, which says that notwithstanding what is in IPC 309, nobody would be punished, and a person who's attempted suicide, nobody would be punished, and that they would be considered to be under severe stress, and appropriate treatment should be provided. But there are some countries, particularly in the African region, where there have been instances where people who have been attempted suicide have been in prison for more than 2 years. And it's a human rights issue because they have attempted suicide under the influence of alcohol, and they have been languishing in prisons for more than 2 years in some other countries. But majority of the countries don't implement this law. Usually the judge leaves off with a warning. But the fact is that it is an offense and it's a crime is stigmatizing. And it's not only stigmatizing. My work in the last 10 years on decriminalization happened because of a personal incident, actually. It happened to me when a young girl living in a small tenement in Chennai ran off with her boyfriend, and the two families brought them back, and there was family conflict. She took an overdose. She was taken to the nearest hospital where she was resuscitated, and she came back. But because it was registered as an attempted suicide, the next day, two policemen walked into the territory and said, "Who was the girl who ran off and consumed the poison?" So the entire community came to know what had happened. And that night, she hung herself. So this incident affected me. This happened about 10 years ago. And after that, I've been working very hard with the Ministry of Health, with the Ministry of Law, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And we tried every other tack. At last, until one of my friends was instrumental in passing the mental health bill of India, Mr. Keshav Desaraju, who I lost a dear friend just 1 month back here, suddenly because of a hemorrhage. And he was the one who pushed this. He said, "I can't do anything about removing the law. That has to happen in the legislature." So, but what I will do is, in the mental health bill, I will introduce this clause so that nobody will be punished. I am still working with the Supreme Court to see that the IPC 309 is there. I was very heartened to hear the health minister here saying that they will repeal the IPC 309 shortly, and it's going to happen soon. It is the best news, I think, because it's not only the punishment, it is the stigma. It's the stigma of being rated as a crime, which will reduce. So why should we decriminalize if you're not punished? One, stigma. Next is the fact that many hospitals or physicians would hesitate to treat because of the political complications or the legal complications between it. So you lose the golden hour. Okay, like an accident, the first 1 hour of an overdose is when you can save many people. The third thing is that it is acting as a deterrent, but there is no way, no issue that it has acted as a deterrent. The fourth is they say if you remove this law, people will, more suicides will happen. But every country which has removed the law, those suicides are actually reduced because more people have sought for help without the stigma, without the fear of being harassed. Okay. So there is, this is an RTA clause, and one of the suggestions which we had the international report was, since 15 of the 19 countries belong to the Commonwealth Federation, maybe every year the Commonwealth ministers meet once in a year, and we are preparing a document to give to the Commonwealth ministers so that if they agree, all these 15 countries will go. And we are hoping for the Muslim countries which follow the Sharia law, we are hoping to have the example of Lebanon into that. And even countries like Ghana, they are working on it. The judicial system in Ghana is very powerful now, and they want to reduce. The government is not allowing, but the judicial system is, so there's a bit of a thing. I can see George wanting to watch. So, yeah. So, as I said, it is what seems impossible. Gandhi said, "What seems impossible is not really always so." So we can do that. Thank you. Yes.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So I saw the lockbox And my understanding is that they tried the lockbox here in Guyana, and it didn't work very well because apparently everybody knew where the key was. So how do folks, so fine, I'm a family, I store my pesticides in the locker. How do I access it?
I don't support keeping it in the home at all. These are community storage pesticides. So every village has a place where we provide this kind of boxes. This is a more sophisticated box. I'll show you the one which I did, which was using the local carpenters and local people. And so you set up like a bank locker in a central place in a village, which is accessible for everybody, and use the local carpenter to build, or local people to build this kind of safety boxes, and then employ a local person to be the manager of this. And the manager has one key, and the head of the household has one key. Okay. And if you look at pesticides, most of the pesticide spraying is done early in the morning or early in the evening, not during the daytime. Okay. So if anybody comes accessing this at a time when pesticides is not being used, the manager will train to ask why are they using it. Okay. And we found that the villagers not only found it to reduce suicide, it made a lot of economic sense to them, because otherwise they would keep it at home and they were always worried whether children would take it and do that, or they bury it in the field and the labels will go off and the potency will be lost. Every time they want to buy, they have to go to the nearest town. Here it was accessible, safe, label, away from women and children. So they looked at it more like that, but without even giving too much of importance to suicide. But we did it for the prevention of suicide, and which worked out well. In fact, we have many incidents. I can send the papers where one man who was who in the FGD said, I had a fight with my wife. I drank so much. I wanted to go and take the pesticide which I usually keep, and then realize it is not there. It is there. So I walked to the facility. It was locked. So I just laid down on the we have a small kind of a porch. I lay down there in the morning, and morning my wife came crying because she didn't find me, and I also realized what a foolish thing I would have done because I have two young children. So this keeping it really saved me and my family. So in this way, it is not individual; it is the community which is involved, and the community is there. Another incident is when a young man took this and went to the thing and went and the neighbor, the neighbor said, "Hey, you don't do agriculture. Why are you taking pesticides?" Okay. And then it found out that he had a fallout with a girlfriend, and they taught her, and this man brought him back. Said, "You don't do agriculture. Your father only does. Why are you taking it?" "Oh, my father asked me." "No, your father will never ask you that. You are fighting. Come, why are no?" So that's how that's why I said community intervention, not individual intervention. This was owned by the community. They wanted it. So we built it up for them. They are running it. And we are providing support. Yeah, the manager will have the key. So it is his responsibility to open in the morning and close it in the night. And we employ two people from the village themselves, so no outsider. So they know. So the whole thing is covered by one thing, but it is kept open so that farmers have free access. Whenever they want, they can. So much so, the farmers love this so much so they are saying, "Madam, to reduce it even further, why don't you buy sprayers so that we mix it here and spray it so nobody can consume it, because in spray the quantum is small."
This is a follow-up to what you were just talking about. And it seems to me that a great deal of responsibility rests on the manager of these lockboxes, these lockboxes, because that person has to recognize that someone is there when they shouldn't be, and has to refuse to let them get into the box. How is that person chosen?
Applicants, okay, and so we kind of interview and selected a person, and we train the person, okay. So manager cannot deny access. He cannot deny access to the farmers. That's not. Then he has a total control over this thing. We cannot deny access, but we can question. We can persuade. Now, as I said, in Gujarat, we have put this up in 54 villages, and the villagers are really liking it.
Are there questions from the Zoom audience? If there are, please put it in the chat. We'll be more than happy to ask the questions for you. It's just asking. Another question I have, and I'm sorry, maybe I missed part of the presentation, but one of the critical age groups here is the 50 to 29. Is there a community type of interventions in addition to the ones you described that you think might work well for the young adult age group?
The young adult age group, at least in many of the low-income countries, what I have found is, see, reducing access to pesticides is a low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to do, and you get maximum bang for your buck in terms of reducing the number of suicides. But if you have to look at the social factors or the social determinants or the psychological factors behind suicide, then it becomes a little bit more intensive work. What I have found in majority of the low and middle income countries where suicide is high among between 15 and 29, majority of them are due to interpersonal conflicts, within that intergenerational conflicts, family problems, fights with parents, fight with in-laws, so the fight between friends, so interpersonal problems, and those have to be, I think, particularly of relevance to people from low and middle income countries is intergenerational conflict resolution techniques, which need to be taught both sides of the generation.
And sort of another question, the elderly is another area where there's a lot of suicide behavior. I'm assuming it's the same kind of principles that correcting the social norms, or helping to fix some of the underlying issues is probably the best avenue for the elderly.
I don't know about the suicides in Guyana in the elderly, but if you look at the statistics, the elderly means above 70 or above 80, the suicide rate is high. The about 70 or above 80, the suicide rate is high. But if you look at it is in terms of numbers, it is very small, because majority of the population here is younger people. So maximum number of suicides happen below the age of 40. So the number of suicides happening above the age of 70 or 80 is very negligible. But if you make it above 60, I find in many of the low and middle income countries, above 60, the suicide rate is probably lower than, for example, in my country, it is much lower than even below 15. Okay. So because most of the low and middle income countries, still looking after your parents, looking after them is one of your primary responsibilities. Okay. So that's why I didn't expand on the difference in suicide between Western concept and the Eastern concept. But if you have time, I can go there. See, the developed country, it is an independent country. Okay. But whereas in many of the Asian countries and in developing countries, we are a dependent country. We depend on our parents when we are young, and then when we grow old, we depend on our children, so on. And you understand a situation by looking at it very analytically, dividing, and then coming to another. Whereas we have a more holistic thing. For example, how to explain this? For example, India, it sent a satellite, one of the best satellites recently. But what did they do before they sent the satellite? They astrologically they found the correct time, appropriate time, prayed, and they sent the satellite. You understand? So these are two contradictions which are acceptable for us, but which a person from the Western world cannot understand how this kind of contradiction can go in. Okay, and then even in persons who have depression, you have more guilt. Okay, in our settings, we will have more shame. We don't find guilt associated with depression very often, even in a clinical setting. We will find more shame. Okay, so and for example, you internalize our emotions, we kind of externalize our emotions. For example, in India, we don't okay. You say, I'm feeling angry. So you have ownership over your thing. Now, if you look at any Indian language, and it will be anger is coming to me. Okay. And of course, our belief system, predestination, all that is there. So, what was, am I answering your question?
It's probably not an easy question to answer, but suicide in the media, you reported that, in India, there was an artist that jumped off a bridge. And then after that, there was an increase in suicidality amongst the bridge. We found a similar thing in Tajikistan, that the news media was glorifying suicidal behavior and death by suicide. I'm not sure what the policies here are for the news media covering suicides, but what is your take, or what is your perception on media and the suicide and the legality of suicide?
Yeah, I think the media has a huge role, and I think it is important for us as people working in suicide to educate the media. See, for them it's news, and they are controlled by TRP and everything else. So we have to understand where they are coming from. So, and that can happen only when we work with the media in majority of the situations. So we know that a sensational reporting of suicide can increase suicide. We also know that we have the Papageno syndrome, where if you report suicide appropriately, relevantly, suicides can be reduced. Okay. So it is a double-edged weapon, and how you use the weapon is in your hands, actually. But it is an important thing to collaborate with them, understand what their difficulties are, and work with them to make it happen.